Welcome back to the Football Fitness Federation podcast. This is episode 281. Welcome to the podcast, Tom King. How are we doing?
I'm good, Ben. Thanks for having me. Good introduction. You're good at those. You've done those a few times, haven't you?
I've got to apologise, Tom, before we start for the absolute hounding on messaging to get you on the podcast. We've been chasing you down for a long time.
I appreciate the pursuit because, my time management skills and my ability to network and things at the best of times is terrible. So that's something that we'll talk about today. I am terribly bad at communicating with others in the field. I'm really bad at networking. I always I always just naturally keep things in the house. So I'm hoping to open up. And I said to you before, this is the first podcast I've done.
I'm very honoured. I'm honoured that is the case because obviously you say that, but we've come in contact through social media. Essentially, I've seen the work that you're doing, sort of reached out. So I know it can be heads down, getting into the business, getting your work done. Which, if anyone's seen the stuff that you're doing, we're going to dive into it today. But absolutely quality, and anyone that's watching on video as well, we'll get a little insight into the facility too. Before we go into all that though, Tom, give us a little bit of background on yourself.
Yeah, of course. So it's going to be a really generic, same as everyone else really. Went to university, studied sports science, studied at John Moores, as most people did as well. End of third year, the week of my final exam, my personal tutor at the time, Andrew Holton, I don't know if you know the name, he was my tutor. I'm not sure where he is now, but anyway, he kind of just brought to my attention there's the PhD studentship, it was called at the time, at Liverpool, coming up, and there was an interview the day after my final exam, or the day before my final exam, I think it was. And I'm sat there thinking, there's no chance I'm going to get it. This final exam is like skeletal muscle physiology. It's the hardest one of the 3 years. But yeah, went for the interview. Obviously, must have said something right, and ended up with a role at Liverpool, full-time role in the first team, completing a PhD at the same time. So almost like a double full-time job at times. So yeah, I was there for 3 years whilst I did my PhD. Finished the PhD, stayed on for another 2 years as first team fitness coach, and now do what I do now. So stepped away from professional sport for reasons we'll get into, and kind of work with similar types of athletes, but across all levels now in more of a private field, more of a kind of one-to-one field. So yeah, that's the background, really.
Awesome. So just give us a little bit of time scale on the time at Liverpool. So what were the years?
Yeah, so let me get this right, 2016 to 2021. Okay. So a lucky period where we won pretty much everything. I saw everything, traveled and saw everything as well, which was great. Well, saw a lot of hotel rooms anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah. So 2016 to 2021, left at the end of 2021 season, which was the season after we won the Prem. And then been doing this for nearly 3 years now. So
awesome. Yeah. Well, we're going to cover plenty about the business and how that operates. So if anyone's interested in that side in terms of the private work that Tom does and the business do, like there's a lot of people that run things right, and I think you're definitely one of them. I'm not just saying that because you're on the podcast, but it'd be great to dive into that, which we are going to do in a little bit. But I wanted to start on a topic I know that you're passionate about, that you do with your athletes in there, and that's in terms of the testing and monitoring. So can you talk to us about your approach to that, and also how you work with players in terms of testing?
Sure, yeah. So I suppose it all probably started many years ago. I was 20, so 8 years ago. No, more than that, 10 years ago. When I first started completing my dissertation for my degree. So I was working at Everton Football Club, and I did a dissertation around sort of hamstring strength, as most people do, and how training affects hamstring strength and things like this. And that was my first kind of exposure to monitoring with force plates and stuff like that. And after evolving that dissertation, the PhD went on to athlete profiling, and that was very much isometric strength profiling, that sort of thing. So I've always had a keen interest in the sort of profiling, the testing side of things. And from that experience and that rigor of going through the PhD, of developing new pieces of kit and critiquing current pieces of kit and stuff, I've turned into like this busy, everything has to be so precise, so accurate for us to be able to accept the data. So from like a testing and profiling point of view, that's like our bread and butter in here, where we try and make sure that every test that we complete is really rigorous, underpinned by science, has loads of sort of normative data behind it for us to be able to compare athletes between each other and to themselves and things like that. Because ultimately, without clean data, how can you make good informed decisions on these things? And when we're all looking to chase those sort of small percentages, if we've got tests that are almost guiding us in the wrong direction to get the wrong percentages or lose percentages, then how's that going to be beneficial? So I think it all starts with really high accuracy, high validity, reliability assessments that we can be really confident in to then inform our data. So to then answer your sort of original question, the philosophy here is, can we understand each individual athlete? Every human's a very sort of different organism, and everybody's built very much differently. Yes, there's absolute fundamentals and basics that you have to live by and follow according to sort of strength conditioning principles, yes. But if we can be really specific with that individual profiling to understand a player's profile on every single physical characteristic, then we can hopefully be a little bit more precise with that program. And that might just be little tweaks. It might be an RDL with a slightly different eccentric to concentric speed ratio, or do you know what I mean? Little nuances. Yeah. So it's just how can we shape the basic fundamentals to fit the player better, rather than just boxing people into these categories. So that's kind of our philosophy. And I suppose really importantly, then the next point is we profile, we intervene. So it's like, we call it our discovery phase. We then program and intervene with an intervention with programs that gets carried out. But then we look to optimize those programs by monitoring regularly, depending on who it is and how often, whether that will typically come every 8 to 12 weeks, which I think we find is really beneficial for multiple reasons. A, because obviously athletes change throughout a season quite a lot. So to simply just have a pre-season and sometimes at best mid-season test from someone, that's not really cutting the mustard sometimes. But also from a business perspective, it's a very different setup, as you'll know, with your business, to team sports where players have to go to work because they're employed. They pay to come here. Yeah. So we have to prove our value and prove our worth. And if we're not, then they can say see you later, which is great. And that's good for us as well, because it means we're always evolving our programs and always evaluating our practice to make sure it's spot on as well. So yeah.
Class. We'll go into a little bit more detail on that just in a second, but I just wanted to get your perspective on players and players' mindsets around testing, monitoring. Do you feel like that's been a big switch over the last few years in terms of them wanting to know more regarding like results and how they can impact those results?
Yeah, I think so. I think a lot of it comes from the coaches. I think you need to, when there was this big wave of tech and sports tech, there was loads of this information available and loads of people collecting information. None of us really know exactly what to do with it. So I suppose in a way that I'm not so much now, but previously it was almost, we have to keep this data private to try and understand it ourselves before we give it to the players. And I think there's always been this issue with players completing loads of tests and never really knowing why. And if they don't know why, they're not really going to apply themselves in the test properly. So yeah, I think now the education around why we're testing with athletes is massive. Going back to the whole accuracy of your data, if you're not pushing maximally on a test that's an isometric strength test to produce a real score, then it's a pointless test as well. But you're not going to do that if you don't believe in it or if you don't know why you're doing it. So yeah, I think athletes are definitely getting more educated as we have been. So it's almost drip fed down, hasn't it? But I think putting ownership on ourselves as coaches to educate athletes to understand it and buy into it is a really important part.
Yeah, definitely. Without obviously giving away the whole process in terms of what you do when players step in the door, just understanding more about your thought pathway. So you get a player in, you might understand like positions, the club they're at, the type of player there are, like sort of limited information at that initial meet. What's your process then to create this individualized program? Like, I know you're going to go through certain tests. Like, how do you go about selecting certain tests, things like that?
Yeah, so we we'll always, if I go right from the start, first point of contact, we'll start with like a phone call, just to we call it like an exploration call, just to understand where they're at. So they can give us some subjective information of things that are feeling good, things they struggle with. They can give us an idea on their sort of schedule with the clubs or wherever it is they are, and any previous injuries and bits like that. If the clubs allow it, and if the communication allows, we'll then also, have some data on previous injuries, whether that's scan reports or testing data of strength scores and stuff like that, because that just helps start to paint a picture already. But yeah, then when they come in, so their first sort of face-to-face contacts, unless it's an injured athlete with a specific requirement of a different type of session, most will go through some degree of profiling, and for us that's called athlete profiling system. So we've got like an APS, we call it, which if we went through all of it with every player, it would be about 4 hours long. So
yeah,
it's one of those where it's a bit of a pick and mix, depending on what we think they need, and depending ultimately on what they pay and what program they sign up to, they'll get like a different amount of sort of tests that we go through. We have like a gym APS, so everything that's done in here, and then we have a field APS that will be done on the pitch. To give you the kind of main sort of sections, the gym APS is everything from body comp, or from top to bottom, it's body comp, some posture and gait analysis bits, some range of motion assessments, movement control, so like how you squat, lunge, brace, stabilize, etc. Power-based assessments, and typically isometric strength assessments. Rarely we'll do dynamic things, as in like your 1RM squats and stuff, just because the athletes we work with aren't really trained for those kind of assessments.
yeah.
So that's the gym-based assessments. And then field-wise, relatively straightforward, really. We'll have like a cardiovascular test if we think we want to assess that, whether that's a yo-yo or a 30-15. That was the one I was looking for, 30-15 IFT. Typically, that's the one that we go for. We sometimes do sort of recovery heart rate analysis from 500-meter runs and stuff like that. From time to time, 1500-meter time trials and stuff. And then we'll also look at your speed-based assessment, so 40-meter sprint with both timing gait, so quantitative analysis, and more video-based analysis as well. We've kind of got our own in-house video analysis system, which is quite timely, but gives quite nice data feedback on the technical side of accelerating and sprinting. And then the same for agility, or when I say agility, I'll probably say agility quite a lot. I use the word agility for players because it's much more simple for them to understand than change of direction.
Yeah.
But for me, they mean the same thing in this call. I know they don't mean the same thing in sports science.
Yeah.
But we'll do an agility assessment as well, sometimes in different directions with different angles and different approach speeds and stuff like that. But that's pretty much our testing battery.
So from that point then, you draw up the plan, you've got the program, obviously depending on what sort of pathway they're going on with yourselves, how many times you're seeing them and all that sort of stuff. Then is that filtered down into, right, these are the areas that we need to consistently monitor, and that then is specific to the player's needs again?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So we'll then go through all of the data and provide like a big feedback report for the player. We'll sit down with the player and sort of present that to them and go through everything top to bottom. There's, as I said, there's a degree of that quite a high degree of that that's objective. There's a degree of that that's subjective as well, just coach's eye type stuff.
Yeah.
But that will give them a real nice sort of presentation of their strengths, their limitations, compared to other pros of their level, or whatever level they're at, age group and stuff, compared to other levels they're at. And then we'll use all of that data to then help shape the program. So we'll have like almost like just as you do your basic S&C principles, what kind of programs do we need? What kind of exercises are good for these athletes? And then based on the level we think they're at, we'll then chop and change different exercises in different areas, or prioritize more in one area than the other. So from a program perspective, most people will have a program that we call a service program. That's like a pre-training preparation program, or a program to do at any point in the day just to work on your own little sort of deficiencies and things like that. Mainly more of your sort of mobility and injury prevention type stuff. They'll then have one or two different sort of strength-based programs. So sometimes it'll be like an isometric strength program when they're playing twice a week. So we can't necessarily do heavy dynamic loading. They'll also have a dynamic loading program when we can.
Yeah.
They'll have a power-based program, of which they won't always complete all of, but it will be elements that will be picked out and done on different days. And then they'll have sort of movement skills-based programs, which I'm sure we'll touch on, which is all around like the speed, the agility, and the contact skills and things like that. And then again, depending on who it is and what they require and things, we'll have, you know, pitch-based programs if we need it, CV programs if we need it, yeah, and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, very much individualized, but with an understanding of just your general principles that are important as well.
And a lot of sort of flexibility on the week and what is going on within that each individual week there as well, isn't there? So when you get to like a week and you've got a player playing a Saturday, Tuesday, Saturday, or whatever the pattern's going to be throughout the week, would they then reach out to you and go, right, I know what my program is, I know what my sessions are, but where do they fit within this week? Or have you gone through like an educational process where you go, this is the blueprint for a week like this?
Yeah, both, bit of both.
Yeah.
Again, I'll keep saying this, depending on what program they're on or how many sessions or whatever it might be or what their requirements are, they'll have different sort of things back from us. But everyone at the very least, at the very start, I probably should have said this, at the very start, we say, we would like to communicate with your club, your parent club, whoever it is that you're mainly working with, to ensure that we can sort of collaborate programs and make sure they're fitting with each other. Sometimes that works, sometimes not. Quite often, the player either doesn't want it or the club just isn't interested, or sometimes they are. It's great when they are. It's best when they are interested, because then the player's right in the forefront of everyone's mind.
Yeah.
But yeah, at the very least, every player that comes in here on a Monday morning or a Sunday night, Sunday's often our Monday at KPI, it's just the way it works, as I'm sure you're similar with, everyone at the very least receives just like a small PDF every week outlining your schedule. So it's like a monthly schedule, basically. So day 1 of the month to day 31. Your training schedule with the team, when you've got games, how many minutes you play, we'll log on that as well. And then when we would advise certain programs to be completed on each day. If it's probably not worth sharing that, is that, because we're on podcast, but if I could, it just looks like a general sort of monthly planner with different colors for team-based activities, different colors for KPI-based activities. And
if you have got that, Tom, I'll put that as a graphic over the top when you're talking about that.
Cool. All right, cool. Yeah, I'll send that through. Yep. Yeah,
brilliant. No, I think that's a top breakdown in terms of sort of initial introduction to the player and then just how detailed it is. And you brought up some great points there, some that we could probably do whole individual podcasts on. But I think I don't want to dive into this topic too much because it's something we've talked about a lot, but this relationship from an external practitioner to a club and a player, this is something important for people to understand going forward. And I love the fact that you've said there that if clubs are receptive and practitioners at clubs are receptive, it just makes the whole process a lot easier. And to have, I think you said having the players player at the forefront of all decisions or something like that. And I think that's something that's come up a lot, and it's an important thing to raise, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's always been like such a taboo about it, and when I was at a club, you would have players that went elsewhere. My take was always I want to know about it.
Yeah.
And without going too in depth on my opinions and things like that, if players weren't getting what they needed at the club, then they need to go elsewhere to get that. And that's not always, or that's not often a reflection of the club. It's never a reflection of lack of expertise of staff in the club at all. Quite often it's the environment and it's the time they have available. You don't have one fitness coach for every player. You've got probably 1 for 10 in most cases, or if you're lucky at Liverpool, we had 1 for every sort of 5 or so. So time you spend with that player is minimal. I spent, as an example, we work with a lad that's still at Liverpool now, 3 times a week, probably an hour and a half to 2 hour sessions at a time at the moment. So it's up to 6 hours a week. I probably spend 1-to-1 with him, half an hour to 45 minutes a week when I was there. So it's never a reflection of the club. It's just a reflection of the environment and the culture that they're in, that for the individual work that's required, and the attention that they need, you need to find a different environment for that. So yeah, as I say, when I was at a club, I was very accepting to that, and I wanted to know about it. I wanted to speak to people about it, and I think that's, from experience of seeing it on the other side now, I think that's what's absolutely best for all parties, because the worst thing is doing too much of one thing or doing one thing at the wrong time, and then the player's the one that suffers, isn't he? So
yeah,
yeah, really, really important. That's actually probably because I've been in the club already. That was something that I was incredibly conscious of straight away, and I've always said to every player, "Can we talk to your club? Can we do this right?" And we may have, from a business perspective, we've definitely lost out on certain players because of that, because clubs may have gone to the player and said, "No, you don't need that, don't do that, and it's not going to be good for you." But I suppose from a personal perspective, that's what's right in my head. So if I will lose a couple of players because clubs don't want them to work with us, but be really transparent and open with the rest, then I'm happy about that. So
definitely. Yeah. I think just the level of detail that you've already discussed in terms of what goes into each individual program, it shows that to replicate that within a club, like you say, it just takes so many bodies, doesn't it? Which
it's impossible.
Majority of clubs don't have, and aren't going to have essentially as well. So
exactly, I as a short example of that, I literally this morning I had a call with see how much I can talk about this, with a head physio, head of medical, and head S&C coach of a Premier League club today, around the player that we've just started working with, and we spoke about all the profiling and went through things. Luckily, these guys are receptive to this sort of stuff, and going through the profiling, it's so understandable that none of this can be not none of it. This much information can't be completed at a club with 20 players all at once. Not because the staff don't have the expertise; they absolutely do, and they'd love to do that. But you'd be there for 2 weeks trying to test everyone in pre-season if you're going to do all this stuff. So to have collaborating external companies involved, I think is good for that stuff, and that's something we'll probably touch on with the consultancy stuff. That's something we're trying to do as well. So
definitely, yeah, I'm keen to get into that because I know you got some great stuff that you do with that, and also coming as well. So yeah, we'll definitely dive into that. Let me get your geeky head on now. Let's talk a little bit about tech.
Because this is my game.
Because technology and what's available to a lot of practitioners now is just unbelievable, isn't it? In terms of the sheer amount, the amount of companies. So just give us a little bit of an idea on insight into where coaches can start in terms of nailing down what they need. And then we'll also go into, we'll extend that out in terms of how you approach it and some of the things you've got going on around technology as well.
Sure, yeah. I think, as most people say, you need to look at the sport first, don't you? And you need to look at the requirements of the sport. So you wouldn't look at jump testing for table tennis. So as a really stupid and simple example, you need to basically look at your sport and look at the physical characteristics that are required of that sport, right? And then look at what you think the most important is. Look at what you think is most feasible and achievable in the environment that you train or work in, with respect to costs and time available and things like that. And then I suppose, prioritize the data that you think is most important for yourself. The thing I'm quite big on, this is when I say I get quite busy with this sort of stuff. I think now there's so much tech available, it works. It's a double-edged sword. It's both a positive and a negative. At the start, when there wasn't a lot of tech available, so there was jump plates, there was IKD and a couple of other bits, I think it was very easy to accept that these must be great pieces of kit because that's all there is, and none of us know that much about it. Now, as tech's grown, there's a lot more available. I think people are starting to understand what things are good for as well, and what things are not good use of. So what I mean by that is that we try and we were forced initially to be really creative with how we profile athletes, because as a startup with zero investment 3 years ago, the capital levels were very low. So we couldn't afford, and we still don't have force plates. We couldn't afford things like that. So we had to be quite clever with how we did things in creative. And I think that led me, alongside completing a PhD, that led me towards, I suppose, challenging gold standards a little bit. Just because they're shiny, they're new, they look good, a lot of people use them, doesn't mean they're always great to use in the situations that you use them for. So without going off on a bit of a tangent, I think my philosophy around the tech is look to use it, but also critique it quite a lot, and don't just use what everyone uses. Look to use what you think is best, and what's best is almost going back to the very start, is understanding how that represents what happens in the sport. Yeah, does that answer your question?
It definitely does, and I think that's the important side of it, isn't it? In getting true understanding of what you're trying to do, and that whether it's a test, you're testing for any certain physical attribute, you've got to understand that first, and not just be the magpie attracted to the shiny new object.
Yeah, absolutely, and yeah, there's various ways around collecting data you want as well that can be incredibly affordable. So if anyone is listening that perhaps is in the strength conditioning world and doesn't have a lot of money, whether that's privately or at clubs, just because you can't afford force play doesn't mean you can't collect good data. So yeah, I'd definitely urge to sort of explore those kind of bits.
So give us a little insight into the first few purchases then, Tom. So when you started getting a bit of capital behind you, in terms of you could go shopping then.
Yeah. Well, the first big one was the gym. So we were, for the first year, working in Liverpool around just private gyms that we could rent, which was fantastic. The guys that allowed us to do that were brilliant. And but in order to become really professional, we obviously needed our own place. And as much as there shouldn't be a problem with it, sometimes working with a Premier League footballer whilst there's a group of 10, 50-year-old ladies coming in to do their legs, bums and tums isn't going to really help us progress. But so yeah, first big purchase was obviously the gym and the equipment that we've got. Tech-wise, we don't have too much. We have quite a lot of in-house stuff, but we work with, from a power perspective, we work with Output Sports. So we collect a lot of data with them, both training and profiling. They're great. They give us a lot of information. All of our strength tech is in-house, that we've kind of built or that we've sort of shaped over time. Simon Gates was something we got more recently. Swift Performance about a year ago. They're brilliant. They're just great for obviously the objective data of speed analysis and change of direction things and stuff like that. Yeah, other than like your little bits like vibrating foam rollers and stuff like that. There's nothing crazy that we use. I think force plates would be a nice one, but I know they're pretty expensive. So if you've got any good contacts, then
if anyone's listening and wants to drop some force plates off, yeah, exactly. No, the point of interest here, Tom. Sorry to cut you off. The point of interest is you just sort of breeze past the internal tech and the stuff that you're developing. I don't know how much you want to go into detail on this. We'll just give people a little insight into that, because that's not something that everyone's doing.
Yeah, so I don't know if many listeners will know, but my PhD was all around hip extension strength and understanding how to assess it properly, and understanding its importance and relation to sort of speed, acceleration, injuries, and things like that in professional football. So whilst going through that process, there was a lot of critiquing of currently available pieces of kit. Some I won't talk about because I don't want to be sued, but some I can. So for example, a simple one, an IKD is a great bit of kit for a lot of things. It's a bit of a Swiss Army knife that claims to do a lot of things, but it doesn't necessarily mean it does everything to a gold standard, even if it's a claimed gold standard piece of kit. Something it definitely doesn't do, according to scientific research, to a gold standard is isometric hip extension assessments. So yeah, we played around with a few different isometric hip extension assessments at Liverpool. Some, or relatively quickly, I critiqued them, which was quite brave of me because I was the youngest person there, and I don't know why I suddenly just jumped down that of this is rubbish. But we did that. So yeah, my PhD evolved into developing a new piece of kit to assess and train isometric hip extension strength. So we've been working with a company on that, and we're hoping to be close-ish to release at some point in 2024. So that's like a piece of kit at the moment that just trains and assesses isometric hip extension strength. We do also use it to assess other things and train other things like calf strength. You can look at mid-thigh pull. You can look quite a few other things at the moment, but we're branding just hip extension for now. But the other sort of assessments that we have, this is where I was talking about the sort of creativity side. There's a hell of a lot you can do with just a pair of load cells that you can buy off Alibaba for 50 quid a pop or whatever, as long as you know what you're looking to assess. And also if you have the freedom to move those load cells into certain positions that assess it best for you with respect to like joint angle or body position or orientation of your body, whether you're standing, lying down, whatever it might be. You can be really creative with those things. So as I say, with our in-house tech, we've got one thing that's like a proper product that assesses a few things. But a lot of our other bits from an isometric strength perspective are things like an ISO knee extension, just with load cells. I can share some photos, they're pretty simple. Abduction, adduction, hip flexion, 2 different calf variations. We started to look at a lot of like shoulder-based bits with goalkeepers as well with these load cells. So yeah, there's just a lot you can do and a lot you can be creative with, but as long as you know what you're trying to look for, and as long as you know the best setup for that, not just copying a setup that you see a product uses, then it's quite beneficial. So
has this been like a bit of an organic like a part of the business, I suppose, like just in terms of you mentioned there about being like one of the youngest members of staff, but really looking into this area, it was obviously a real area of passion and something that you feel that you could impact. So that from then to now, has that just been an area that you've sort of wanted to get into, want to make more specific for your players as well, and then it's just developed from there?
Yeah, definitely. Organic is a great word for it, because that's that's absolutely what it was. At Everton, we used a test to assess hamstring strength that I didn't really like, but I was 18 and I didn't want to challenge it then, or 19 or whatever. At Liverpool, we used another test to assess hip extension, which I didn't think did, and so I wanted to change that so we could really properly understand the data we collect and how that impacts performance and injuries. And obviously hamstring injuries has always been such a big thing over the past sort of 10, 20 years. And from a hip extension perspective, now I'm going all the way back to my sort of dissertation and PhD, your hamstrings are quite often during sprinting strained proximally, so quite high up, and quite often the biceps femoris, and that's the muscle that's mainly active during hip extension rather than knee flexion tasks. So from a hip extension point of view, that's why we kind of then developed this piece of kit, and it was very much a research tool first, and once it came sort of to the end of the PhD and there was a bit of traction of other people wanting to understand how to set it up and stuff, I thought, well, let's perhaps look at turning this into a bit more of a product with a better piece of software and stuff like that. And I suppose that's been my take on, like you say, all of our tech. We started from nothing, built it up, and now we've got like a couple of more pieces of tech and kit that we started from nothing because we didn't want to buy the really expensive stuff, and we built it up. And hopefully there's a few other products on their way, but not just for the sake of being a product, actually for the need of collecting data in the right way.
Where do you see that then? I'm talking about this specific part of the business in terms of the developing of products. Where do you see that developing? Is that going to be a big part of like the future of the company?
Yeah. So 3 years ago, when I left my previous employment and started this, I was very naive anyway, leaving and thinking of what I may or may not have done, but very naively thought that 50% of my time would be done on tech, 50% on the coaching. That very quickly flipped to 99% coaching, 1% tech, because I realized that I've got a mortgage to pay and I need to earn money, and a piece of tech that's nowhere near a product yet is not going to make me any money anytime soon. So I've forgotten the question.
I was just saying in terms of like the future looking forward.
Yeah. So now that we are more established as a business, the tech stuff is starting to rise again. To be honest, I would have liked a lot of our tech that we're building to have been out there already 2 years ago, but the coaching has just gone like that and the tech's had to take a back seat. But yeah, now we're a bit more established as a business. The tech side is definitely something we're looking to keep building in the future. It's, I suppose, you have to look at your own skill set. And as much as I love coaching, I do love the sort of technical side of building or of assessing athletes and building sort of needs analysis properly and things like that. So yeah, definitely something we're looking to keep pushing.
No, I love it. I love that the sort of passion and inquisitive nature of like looking at a player, looking at the demands on the player, looking at the areas that they need to progress and maybe some areas that they can really target, and then working back from there. It's like it's the ultimate in terms of sports science support, I suppose, isn't it? That you get in, you can just dive into it. And this is kind of like a seamless transition where I'm going to talk a little bit more about the individual approach with players, which we've touched on already in terms of the difference from being at clubs, which we have spoke about. But the other thing I wanted to speak about was around specific positions and then developing programs off the back of that as well. So what's the sort of idea, the methodology around position specific programming?
Yeah, I think probably nothing that's groundbreaking or that other people aren't doing too much of. But I suppose from a positional perspective, you've got to look at the physical demands of the most important part of the week, which is the game, right? The highest part of the week for outfielders. Actually, let me throw that in there.
Yeah.
So for outfielders, you know, obviously your wide players, your attacking players are typically going to do a lot more sort of high speed runs, that sort of thing. Your midfielders probably a bit more axel decel focused or whatever, more volume focused for your midfielders. So the same as everything, stripping that down, you then obviously got muscle groups that are going to be more heavily reliant upon during those tasks in the game. So your wide players and wingers probably need slightly stronger, slightly more resilient hamstrings, glutes to be able to repeat those high intensity actions, whereas your midfielders might need slightly stronger eccentric quad strength and more ability to press and break and things like that. So yeah, that's typically how we'll split those kind of things. But I suppose for me, normally that stuff comes out in our profiling as well. You know, we know the position, and knowing that position, if there's limitations within the profiling that we have that we need to focus even more on because of the position themselves, then we will do that. But I suppose we would probably more so look at like limitations as a whole and focusing on those and then maximizing the strengths and then having an eye on the position as well. From a goalkeeper's perspective, that's obviously very much different because they have very different demands. Goalkeeper S&C is something I've always been quite passionate about. Again, organically fell into that. There wasn't too much support for goalkeeper S&C at my previous employment. So I suppose I probably took it upon myself just to get involved in those. And there was one goalkeeper that I got on with really well, so I spent a lot of time with him in the gym. There was another goalkeeper, Simon Mignolet, who was like obsessed with the gym. So I spent a lot of time with him in the gym as well, and did a lot of stuff around, you know, the pitch-based load quantification and gym-based load analysis and things like that, to understand goalkeepers better. And yeah, something that's kind of fallen for us at KPI is we do have quite a lot of goalkeepers we work with, so we do spend a lot of time trying to better understand them, because I still think it's a little far behind the outfielders as well. But yeah, different requirements for those. Obviously, a lot more upper body things and a lot more lateral movements. Yeah, stuff like that. So very different from a positional perspective.
Yeah, it's that breakdown, isn't it? Again, from the demands from outfield to keeper. I think just before we go into keepers a little bit more, because I know there might be a certain keeper off the back of potentially a man of the match performance not a few days ago that you worked with in a
I heard he didn't
final.
get man of the match, by the way.
No way.
Someone told me yesterday he didn't get it.
That's ridiculous. Yeah, ridiculous.
Virgil got it instead because he scored a header.
That is ridiculous. No, but I've seen some of the work that you do with him, and it'd be great to sort of dive into that in a second. But just in terms of the outfield players again, you talked there about the different demands on each individual position. Do you tend to see patterns? So if you've got, say, a wide player coming in, but you've got a number of wide players, we know the demands that are put on them in terms of the game, but do you tend to see similar physical characteristics, attributes from the players in the gym, or not?
Yeah, definitely. I think more so for the reason of the players have ended up in that position because of their physical characteristics. So
Yeah.
your wide players are always, a bit quicker on our field-based profile, and they're probably more explosive in your power tests. Strength-wise, perhaps not the case. Quite often, I don't see that being the case.
Okay.
With the central players, yeah, I'd say your central players are often a bit better at more of like the lateral movements, maybe the stability type movements and things like that. Whereas your wide players are a bit more like the linear kind of speed guys. But yeah, from a profiling perspective, not too many really typical trends apart from those that you'd expect, to be honest. My belief is still that every individual has quite specific makeups, and quite often their birth or their born genetic and physiological characteristics that are set in stone are obviously then going to impact their maturation, their change in physical characteristics over time, and their position definitely then impacts that. But I still go back to, okay, who is player A and what is their skeletal or their posture naturally like, and that sort of thing that affects things a little bit more so, I'd say, than their position.
Yeah, definitely.
And the genetics, obviously.
Yeah, no, that's class. Going back onto the keepers then, when we're looking at that, we spoke about the process of meeting them, doing a phone call, getting them in, doing initial sort of assessments on them. When you're looking at that position, what are some of the key things that stand out for you where we're like, right, this is what we need to be preparing them for? And then obviously filters down to in order of importance. This is the most important, but we've also got all this down here that we need to be making sure that they're ready for.
Yeah. Obviously their profile is is very different, and their requirements on the pitch is very different. They have a lot more, or I suppose their lateral movements are a lot more pronounced as a ratio to their sort of linear or whatever type movements.
Yeah.
So as much as they need to be very strong in that lateral plane, so hip abductors, hip adductors, trunk stabilizers, things like that, they need to be really strong. Quite often I've found they are quite good for goalkeepers because I think they've just developed that from being a goalkeeper. I think I probably see a good amount of imbalance, sort of left to right imbalances with goalkeepers that obviously do a lot more kicking on one leg than the other. Every outfielder obviously has their kicking leg or dominant leg, but goalkeepers do a hell of a lot more ball striking, right? So if I was a betting man, I'd say 75% of goalkeepers that come to us have tighter hip flexors on their kicking leg than they do on the non-kicking leg, and things like that. They obviously do a lot of sort of unorthodox movements, whether that's laterally or landing from jumps and things like that. So stability around the hips, knees, and ankles is obviously always a big one. That's something I typically see them not being very good at, which then, to me, it's then obvious why there's a lot of sort of knee-related issues and ankle-related issues for goalkeepers and things like that. Most are pretty stiff in the shoulders, often have imbalances around the hip, the shoulder rotators and things. So just trying to get those a bit more symmetrical, or at least at a range that we think is like a comfortable range to be throwing and punching and things like that with, is really important as well. So strangely, almost every goalkeeper, I can think of one that I've ever assessed, has really mobile hamstrings, and I don't know why. And maybe it's because they don't sprint that much, so they never get exposed to too much strain. They obviously kick a lot, so go through a lot of hip flexion and knee extension, so maybe that helps. But yeah, strangely, I don't think that importantly, but they always have really good hamstring mobility, which is a strange one.
Yeah, it definitely is. Just around the shoulder, because I think this is an area that we're starting to understand a little bit more, not just in terms of football, but just in terms of sports science, S&C in general. There's a lot of people doing some amazing work about everything around the shoulder and what impacts the shoulder. What's been the sort of has there been anything recently that you've started putting in with goalkeepers or looking into around the shoulder that you feel has developed them?
Yeah, we're probably, I'd say, apart from like your mobility assessments, we're in the earlier stages of like assessing and understanding the strength capabilities. I think we test strength at the moment. Let me get this right. So shoulder internal rotation in a supine position, often in like this kind of position. So rather than like what most people call neutral, we look at this position just because that's a position where you're at like relative stretch of the muscles around the front and injury risk, I suppose, of overextending at the back.
Yeah.
So we assess there, and then we assess external rotation in that neutral position going back. So almost mimicking that like end of a throw type position.
Yeah. And that's also supine, is it?
That is, I'm just trying to, no, it's seated. So it's literally in this position.
Seated. Yeah.
And they're like when we're trying to pull up.
Yeah.
So far our ratios are pretty much 1-to-1 on that sort of stuff for healthy individuals. But yeah, we do a lot of, within like upper body or contact skills sessions that we call it, we do a lot of like shoulder stability work, just your general stuff of like starting on the floor, getting through your ground-based mobility, wrist, finger, shoulder, whatever mobility type stuff. But we do a lot of stability work, often trying to keep that quite a reactive stability type element where you're integrating a lot of the smaller stabilizer muscles and things like that, which I think are important. The same as your lower body, my view is, the prime movers are often the things that are quite strong and people are good at using, but those sort of secondary muscles, the stabilizers and stuff, are always quite weak. So as soon as you add a bit of instability or imbalance or complexity around a movement that's not just like a shoulder press or a fly or whatever, that's when people get found out a little bit. And I think that's where, well, research would obviously suggest that's where the problems arise, when your stabilizers aren't keeping up with the prime movers. But as I say, we're, from a training perspective, we've done a lot of training bits, but from a profiling perspective, we're a little bit sort of early days on the strength and power side of things. We do a lot of power-based training, so a lot of like med balls, slams, swings, throws, a lot of stuff with the output where we're looking at bar velocity and things like that, whether it's a press or a throw or things like that. So we do a lot of that stuff to obviously try and mimic those explosive movements. We've got quite a big emphasis, both for outfielders and goalkeepers, though, on integrating the lower and upper body together. So we don't often train upper body things in isolation. There's not often times where we'll do like a bench press, or not to say that's wrong, but we'll often try and have things integrated a lot. You've only got to look at goalkeeper movements. When you're using the upper body, a lot of the power comes from the lower body. It's not just, your upper body's more of your sling, isn't it? And even when you're changing direction, you have to integrate the upper body. So that's why we have to do a lot of sort of upper body integration stuff for your lower body exercise. So we treat goalkeepers very differently, but try and integrate a lot of sort of full body stuff together rather than just split things and keep it simple.
Yeah, brilliant. I find it quite a fascinating position because of how it's transitioning as well. Because obviously years ago you had keepers that probably did a lot. I know there's still that will, but a lot more kicking out the hands, and now you see the keepers playing out from the back a bit more, don't you? Maybe getting a few long balls, but probably not as many. And I don't know the data on this, but not as many as probably there was before. And then just in terms of the speed of the game, shot power, things like that, surely that's a bigger demand in terms of on that position as well.
Sure, yeah, definitely. I always think that, well, not think, is, it's research backs it up as well, that really it's not the game that's the problem at all. The interesting thing with goalkeepers is the periodization around the training week. And often their goalkeeper actions don't complement themselves too well. So from like an outfielder perspective, quite often people have like your strength day, your speed day, or your like intensive and extensive day, when you are using different muscle groups quite often. But for your goalkeepers, things like your kicks, your jumps, your dives, they are quite like knee and ankle dominant. Obviously, when I say knee, like quad for kicking and things like that, and jumping. So I think periodizing that in the training week is quite difficult for goalkeeper coaches to make sure they get all the right work, but also for S&C coaches to make sure we're doing the right things and not overloading at the right times. I think a nice way of that, I can probably talk about this, but a nice way that Liverpool used to do it for goalkeepers there, they used to have like a speed and agility day, or a speed across goal type day, when they are doing a bit more like your lateral movements and your dives. Then they might have a day where it's more about like collecting crosses and kicking and stuff like that. So they did try and split things a little bit, which was useful, so we could sort of periodize the gym stuff nicely as well. But yeah, it's difficult when you are, you know, playing a game of football and the goalkeepers are required for small-sided games. So they're diving, they're jumping, they're kicking, they're doing all sorts, aren't they, all the time, almost every day. So yeah, there's no what's the word I'm looking for? It's basically, it's obvious that things like your patellar tendons are always big issues for goalkeepers, and knee-related issues, or like tight quads and things. That it's obvious because there's just a lot of repetitive actions of those kind of things, right?
100%. So you probably covered a lot of this already with what you spoke about, but just in terms of anything else that you wanted to cover, just around movement-based training, because I know this is something that you've put out quite a bit of in terms of what you do with players. So is there anything else that you feel like we need to cover with that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of good stuff coming out, isn't there, from different people around the sort of movement. We call it movement skills, so like the movement skill side of things, which for me is like we define that as the ability to express your gym-based characteristics on the pitch better.
Yeah.
So there's that like age-old car analogy, isn't there? Like your strength and powers, you like your engine.
Yeah.
And then all of the smaller parts, like your spoiler, how streamlined your chassis is, the car tire pressure and stuff. That's more of your bits around, you know, are we setting our bodies up in the right position? Are we getting the hips high before we attack down? Are we able to activate the right muscles at the right times and coordinate that stuff together? I think that's all the smaller bits, but the bits that really sometimes are almost like that key to unlock that extra little bit of performance. I think everyone's always chasing, aren't they? Like transferring things from gym to pitch, and it is tough. It is really tough, especially when you don't have that much control over the pitch. So yeah, we use the movement skills as an almost bridge towards that. We split our movement skills into like 3 areas depending on the sport and things like that. We have like a speed movement skills type session or type philosophy, excuse me, which is all around your acceleration, your max velocity type mechanics, and how the nuances around how they are different and how they change. And then we have more of like an agility type movement skills, which, like I say, agility, change of direction, same thing for me for now.
Yeah.
Where we'll break things down into like your deceleration phase in different directions. We call it the redirection phase, so that push off where you actually probably gain a bit more, or if you can do that well, you gain a bit more on your opponents to redirect yourself in the right position. And then the re-acceleration phase, so getting out of the turn and that sort of thing. And then the contact skills is the final one that we work on, which is less so for footballers, but we still do focus on it. The contact skills is more just like in duels, so like holding people off or wrestling for balls and stuff like that, or in like your rugby, it's taking hits and giving hits and stuff like that. So yeah, they're the kind of 3 areas that we work on. I'd say they actually make up quite a lot of our coaching for athletes, mainly because if they are doing gym work in the club, quite often it is the more basic strength type gym work. So if they're coming to us once or twice a week, then our time or their time here is probably best suited to work on things that they're not getting. Even if we don't think the strength stuff at the club is, you know, perfect, we might give them some add-ons to do on their own, and they'll come to us for the sort of technical side of things. And understanding how to run properly and change direction is obviously a lot harder than lifting a bar up and down, right? So
yeah.
So it needs a coach for that sort of coach's eye and that one-to-one contact. I suppose from like a sessional setup perspective, our 4 key areas that we talk about is muscles, shapes, speed, and movement. So muscles is more of like your prep section. So if we're on a speed day, do we need to mobilize the hamstrings? Do we need to activate the glutes properly? Do we need to work on some sort of like ankle stiffness, things like that in like the prep phase? And during all of this, sorry, something just came on there. During all of this, I keep raising my hand and it told me something. During all of this, we are taking into account what they need as individuals rather than just, you know, speed. How do we improve it? It's okay. In the muscle section, do we need to spend a bit more time prepping the hamstrings because they're not very mobile, or do we need to use the glutes for a little bit longer to make sure they're really activating at the right times and we're getting a more sort of hip extension drive rather than knee extension first, or things like that. The shapes section would then be the more technical movement based. So what does it look like to accelerate and sprint with good technique? I wouldn't say there's gold standards, but there's definitely things we want to avoid. And everyone has different mechanisms or different ways in which they reach good performance. So we kind of have like things that we aim for and things that we try and push a little bit, and then things that we try and pull back in that sort of section. And that's typically, everything's gym based, so that's typically more like integrated movements together, whereas the muscles is more isolated movements. Then when we've integrated them, we'll then look at maybe the next section being speed, which is more of like your power based and ISO strength or like RFD based exercises that we'll monitor and try and improve over time. So that could be like jumps in different directions, or like I say, RFD on the hip extension bench that we've got, that sort of thing. And then the movement section is like that magic at the end, that really hard bit of, we've isolated everything, all those little individual qualities that we think are important for speed. We've tried to integrate them together, to work on them together. We've then improved the sort of the force and the velocity side. And then can we actually integrate all of that together in movements that are a bit more similar to the pitch? So whether that's like, if it's agility, that could be with an external cue or like a successful or unsuccessful rep finisher or that sort of thing. To try and almost marry up that gym stuff with the pitch stuff to get that carried over a little bit better. So that's kind of the setup of those sessions. But as I say, we probably spend more than 50% of our sessions doing that with players. So
I think on that movement skill side, that's something that's been really impressive in terms of the work that you're capturing and putting out on Instagram. Because it is, I know there'll be people doing it, but because it's very different to what you see being posted a lot of the time, you see the sort of specificity for each individual player, but you can notice the patterns as well in terms of what you're trying to do. And I think you do a great job of breaking that down. So it's really cool to understand the process that players are going through and where that sort of slots into the individualized programs as well. So I really appreciate you breaking that down. Yeah,
definitely. It's tough, isn't it? Like understanding how people sprint quicker is really tough. So
yeah,
you can't improve that unless you break it down, and utilizing the data that we get in assessments helps, because if we look at someone and they're not doing very well at fully extending the hip when they accelerate, or the separation between the legs isn't big enough, then we can kind of use that data in the profile and to try and explain that as one. But then if we then break it down, we can then work on that individually and then try and get it integrated together, right? So improving those gross movement skills is tough. So we feel as though consistently breaking those down to then build them back up is a good way of doing that. And so far we've seen some good improvements. So hopefully we're doing something right.
Yeah, no, definitely. So I want to do a little bit of a transition now. I want to switch off the scientist, the technician side of what you do, and turn on the entrepreneur, the businessman side. So we're going to cover.
This is the bad side.
This is the interesting side for me, because I think we spoke about it a little bit before we started recording on just the fact that you set things up, essentially jumping into the deep end. You then try and find a way of swimming, and that's essentially what we're doing.
That's it.
But I think what would be really interesting for the listeners, there's obviously a lot of people looking to do a similar sort of transition to what you've done. And if you could go into, well, I know you've covered it a little bit already, but in terms of that initial setting up of the business, what that looked like, you talked about using the different gyms and things, which is real life. That's essentially what we need to do, isn't it, to get to this point and beyond. But is there anything else in terms of that initial setup where you feel like this is what people need to be aware of?
See, this is where I struggle, because, as I said at the start, I'm really bad at networking. So I'm just thinking now, before I decided to leave my employment, I don't think I spoke to one S&C coach that did what I do now to get their advice.
Yeah.
Not a single one, which looking back now baffles me, but I understand it, because I still haven't asked really anyone for any advice. I'm just really bad at that sort of stuff. So something I didn't do but would say to do is definitely just network and speak, and get those kind of, you know, experiences from people. What I think the way I did it and saw it is, so I left at the end of the season. That was the start of the off season, which for private coaches is often quite a busy period.
Yeah.
So I think I kind of knew and accepted that I'd probably be a bit busier as soon as I left, because there'll be a lot of players wanting sort of like off season coaching and things like that. And like you said, I didn't have too much of a plan other than I was really passionate about what I wanted to try and achieve. I felt like I knew what was missing. So I was really passionate about my product and my service. And I think probably just subconsciously, I felt all I need to do is just get into a couple of players' DMs. I need to speak to a couple of people.
Yeah.
And then get them in front of me to showcase what I'm trying to do and why it's beneficial to them, to then hopefully start, you know, building a bit of traction. So leaning on contacts is something I did. It's definitely not too much, but I definitely did. So to explain that, my first 3 football clients upon starting KPI, one used to play at Everton that I knew from my time there. He was in the under 23s when I was 19, so we're both a similar age. And he was then at a different club, but he lived in Liverpool for the off season. So one was with him. Another one was with an ex-Liverpool player who then was at Blackpool, who I sort of kept in touch with a little bit. And another one was a good friend of a friend of mine who also used to play for Liverpool Academy. So like those first 3 clients were people that we had, like, we were either mutual contacts or we knew each other. So I think, you know, without something like that, that would have been difficult. But yeah, more than anything, actually, I've started using that Threads, you know, on Instagram.
Yeah.
I put a thread out the other day. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was basically like, if your product's no good, you're not going to retain clients. So
yeah, so true.
You need to make sure if you're deciding to change something or do something, there has to be a good reason for it, and you have to be passionate about it. You have to be sure of it. So I think more than anything, as a startup, I was rubbish at most things, but I was just good at being confident and passionate about what I did, and proving that. And when players came in, I was good at showcasing what I wanted to do and showing them why it works and why it, and why they need to be consistent with it. So I suppose to round that up, I'm not that good and wasn't that good at telling people why they need these sort of things, or communicating with other people on what could be important, or getting advice from them. But I was quite good at showing like what I think is important and being confident in the product.
I think there's a hell of a lot there, Tom, because you kind of putting yourself down on the networking side, but you've also just proved that you do it, because you did it with players, and they were the first clients that were through the door, which are essentially the people that are paying to the business, they're paying to you, they're getting the business up and running. So as much as you're not going around networking with a load of coaches or a load of businessmen, you're networking with people that are actually going to be coming through the door. And I think the other thing to take from that is, and we sort of said it at the start, when you're running something, you go head down and you just go one foot in front of the other, you get going, and then you sort of work out where to go from there. The fact that that was led by passion, and you sort of said you knew what was missing, that was going to be my next question, is what was the reason for stepping into this, the private sector, essentially? And I think you've kind of answered it with that you had the passion behind work. I'm guessing working with players individually and going into that level of detail, but also you saw that as a missing part at clubs, like we sort of talked about before. Is that fair?
Yeah, definitely. I think, again, I didn't do much reflecting at the time either, and I still haven't on that time, but I was trying to before our call. And I think the point I probably got to was, I felt like I really had the urge to do more and to provide more. I loved my time at Liverpool, the employment I was at, but felt as though that was becoming a little bit stale. Was quite a negative word, but I couldn't do more. I couldn't do more for people.
Yeah.
And I think I probably had a choice then. I was like, look, I'm 24 years old, I think. So I could look for another club. In fact, I see. I'm only just reflecting now, but I did think about this a lot. I thought, right, okay, I could look for another club. But the main reasons for me perhaps wanting to leave, I don't think will be resolved if I go to another club.
Yeah.
Because the environment's still similar. So I still want to work with individual athletes. I looked at the American model quite a lot and seeing a lot of sort of NFL players and basketball players working with individual coaches and the benefits they get from that. And as we've kind of spoken about, my philosophy is all around sort of profiling and individualizing athletes and things. So I thought, okay, I could go to another club and try and be, a high position and influence things more there, but that won't change actually what I want to do. So I'm 24, I haven't got any kids yet. I haven't got that many commitments. Let's just jump in and try something. So I think that was the plan. Just going back to your previous comment as well. Where was I going? So you said about like head down, startup business, like sort your own. Can I swear? Sort your own shit out first.
Yeah.
That was very much me. Like sort my own shit out before I can look for other people for help and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Which is one way of doing it. I don't necessarily think it's the best way of doing it, but I suppose I've just innately just got this thing inside me that's like, I'm responsible for my shit. I don't need people helping me because it's not their problem. And almost, I probably see that on the flip side a little bit where people will sort their own shit out and they don't. Do you know what I mean? So, which I need to get better at, I think is wrong. So it's something something I didn't do, but something I'd urge people to do that want to do this is I think actually network as much as possible, not to the extent where you're completely losing your own, the amount of time you've got to come in and build your own business. But I think you can probably learn a hell of a lot from other individuals doing similar things or in completely different fields. And that's something that I don't do enough of that I need to do for sure.
I do think you're right with that, but at the same time, as a bit of a caveat to it, there'll also be a lot of people probably at clubs still right now, maybe even listening to this, that are going through that phase in the mind of I want to do that, and just over planning, over complicating, and not just taking that step. There's somewhere in between that, isn't it, that we sort of need to be and take lessons from both.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. You can plan till the cows come home, but you just got to jump in and do it. And like you say, you learn on the job, don't you? We said at the start, jump in and just talk the good stuff, and we'll try and make our way.
I'm sure you could probably write a book on some of the things that have come up in business that you didn't expect to come up. that could probably be a whole different podcast. But
I could write one on just this week.
Exactly. Yeah. That's so true. Tom, the other thing I wanted to go into, again, you've referenced it a little bit before, and go into this as much or as little as you want, but just how, in terms of how the business is structured. So when players are coming in, what are the options? You've talked about us and the sort of the phrase and the language that you use within the company. Who's in the company? Who's involved in the company? How's it all broken down?
Yeah, so we are, I always say, and this puts it into like a sport term, so people quite like it. We are a low volume company and a high intensity company. So compared to like your typical gym owner or your typical strength conditioning business, we have not too many athletes. And the reason for that is because we try and provide like a really high level of service for them.
Yeah.
So, around an hour and a half session that someone might have when they come in, depending on what program they're on and what requirements they have, there's probably at least an hour and a half extra on top of that. That's preparation or reflection from that session. We have low volume of clients, relatively low volume of coaches. So we've got 3 coaches. We've got an external marketing team who are fantastic. They're pretty much like a full-time team for us, both financially that we pay them and both what they give us back. And then we have a few other sort of partners in different areas as well. But From a coaching perspective, we've got 3 coaches looking to bring in another coach. We're actually advertising at the moment for another coach. So if there's anyone listening that fancies coming in for an interview, then we can. And also looking for a couple of interns, just to give some experience to sort of university students and stuff. So yeah, from a clientele perspective, low volume, high intensity. We have a few different options of coaching. So during that sort of discovery phase of what we kind of go through, that discovery phase is all about understanding their requirements, right? So depending on their current level of support, depending on where they want to be, depending on obviously their financial situation, what level they play at, they've got a couple of different options of choices, and depending on which coach they work with, depending on what they get. So like I said, there's a session itself, but there's a hell of a lot that can go with that. So are we planning all of your schedule? Are you doing work through our online training platform as well when you're not with us? Are you what sort of tech is involved and all that sort of stuff? So there's a couple of different options for pricing and programs and stuff like that. And then in order for us to exist as a business, in order for the players to see improvements, then we build service agreements that are like long-term service agreements, as best as possible. Hopefully there's not many athletes listening to this, but they can be quite difficult with certain things sometimes. But yeah, like it's the same as anything. If you sign up to do something for 3 weeks, you're not going to see much. If you sign up to do something for 6 months, regularly and consistently, you're going to see your improvements, right? So so that's really important for us to sort of maintain that level of business and that commitment, because otherwise our work isn't gonna help people. It's a waste of their money if they're just going to dip in and out every couple of weeks for a session here and there, that sort of thing. It just doesn't work. And then obviously from a financial and a business perspective, we do need those commitments, because if we're giving so much to a small number of clients, if we lose one, that ratio of what we've lost compared to like another company that could be like 1% of their clientele, that's quite a lot, right? So when we put in a lot of work to understand the athlete in the discovery phase initially, we're almost overreaching what we're providing in the first few weeks or months to really understand the athlete, to then hope in the long term that gets almost like given back to us in longevity from them. So that's kind of how it's set up, really. And that's just the coaching side. So we've obviously got the tech side, the consultancy side, and a few other little bits like online coaching and stuff that we work on as well. So
brilliant. No, I think that's a great insight into how it works in terms of the staff, and also a little bit on the role that you'll have available as well. How does that look for the coaches then that you've got within the business? Are they all working one-on-one? Are they working just with clients coming through the door there?
Yeah, it depends. It depends on what we want from the coach, and it also depends on their skill set. I'm quite big on leaning on what the coach likes to do and what they're good at. We have quite a rigorous sort of interview process, mainly to make sure we find the right person. We can always get people better at coaching, but to find the right person is massive, right? And even then, you're never going to know someone as well as they know themselves. So as that sort of coach evolves through being employed by us, there'll be certain skill sets that we think are suited for them doing certain things. But most coaches that have been with us will have like a degree of we call like an admin salary. So that's for anything like in the background that assisting with helping the business evolve, or helping with building programs for athletes, or video and things, or anything like that, social media, things like that. Still have like a dual salary, basically like an admin salary and a coaching salary, and the coaching salary will be then geared around the sort of one-to-one coaching they do. Excuse me. So that's the slightly more variable one, depending on how many sessions they have every week and things like that. But the admin stuff is more of the stable one. We'll have some people will be more involved in like small group coaching, which we don't do much of, but we want to kind of do more of it. We just don't really at the moment. Some will be more involved in like the online coaching. We've got one lad who is a bit more involved in consultancy for one of the clubs that we work for. So it's typically like the main thing is our bread and butter is like the one-to-one coaching. for the main stage. But yeah, there's different things that people get into as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And obviously the detail and the things that we've spoke about right the way through the episode so far, that underlies why the one-to-one is the focus, but there are also all these other options, aren't there, in terms of like a scale for the business to operate on, right down to sort of online support. The other thing that we spoke about when we were talking about topics, and this really interests me for a number of different reasons, is the consultancy side for clubs and players, and how that is structured at the minute. So how you go about that in a minute. But I know a big passion of yours as well is to get a high level of support, which you're doing with your Premier League players, to the lower leagues and lower league players as well. So can you touch on that in terms of how that looks? You've obviously just mentioned one of the staff members is involved in that as well, but also where you would like that to go.
Yeah, of course. So I think, to say this in the right sort of order. So the consultancy side is something that I've always been interested in, and by consultancy, what I mean is us as a business supporting other businesses. So it's not about athletes; it's about the business, right? Okay. Something I'm big on is assisting companies with things from the very top. So the whole infrastructure, the whole philosophy, the whole culture of the club, or whatever it is, whatever the organization is, all the way down to the nitty gritty of like specific tests or specific things. It's very, from my experience and from speaking to other people, which I've said I don't do much, but I do a bit of.
You do more than what you think, I think.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, from experience, it's very easy in your club environment to get very much caught up in like the day to day, right? And it's very hard to zoom out and take a big wide look at everything. And that's for everyone. That's for just that's for your S&C coaches that are just first team fitness S&C coaches, whatever it might be, but also for like more of the managerial managers, directors, head of performance, that sort of thing. It's very hard when your full-time role is very much in a club or in a sports organization that's so like reactive, so just go all the time. It's very hard to zoom out and see perspective, right? So something I've been sort of interested in and passionate on is doing that, because now we're outside of it. Again, in a similar way to coaching one-to-one, we're in a very different environment where we don't have eyes in the club all the time. We're not always busy dealing with all the club requirements of the day-to-day that are necessary. What we can do is support of speaking to the right people in different positions in clubs and supporting on like the bigger picture. So across a season, we, whether it's meetings or heading into the clubs and having catch-ups and things like that, it's much easier for an external company to then provide those recommendations and reminders to people in the club of have you remembered this, or this is our philosophy, are we sticking to this, or have we remembered that this needs to improve, or are we doing the in-house research or CPD things that we said we're going to do, that sort of stuff. Yeah. As well as obviously the actual training philosophies and analysis side of things. So that's more of like the hierarchy, the sort of the global side of things. And then from a consultancy perspective as well, we have been shaping our service that's for one-to-one to try and fit club environments a little bit better, so we can provide a bit more guidance and support on things like athlete profiling and training programs and individualized coaching and things like that. Because again, it's very hard in pre-season, especially for coaches to assess everything they want to assess, to analyze everything they want to analyze, to feed it back to players so they can understand it and digest it, and then to build training programs that are individualized. And then after all of that, monitoring those individualized programs and making sure players are sticking to them is very difficult as well. So that's something that we've been working on with a couple of different clubs and hoping to do more so. More so in the future for sure.
No, it's really interesting, because I think with that as well, with you having the understanding of both sides and obviously picking up more experience in this private way of working on an individual basis or a small group basis, but still understanding the demands of being at a club, time restraints, the amount of players that you're having to deal with, that combined together must give you a really good way of sort of approaching it and going, this is what you could use to give you the biggest bang for buck.
Yeah, definitely. It's almost, we spoke about the taboo around players going to external companies for support. It's almost like flipping that on its head a little bit.
Yeah.
And can we go to clubs to say that, look, players are clearly realizing that they maybe need more or need to look elsewhere for certain things. We can support with that, but we can also do that on a club level, on a global level, of how can we improve the practices. And for clubs that's useful, because from business perspective, it's not as if they have another person on the payroll. Paying for like an external service is going to be cheaper than having another full-time member of staff, who again, if it is a full-time member of staff, is just only going to end up getting engrossed in the day-to-day anyway. So yeah, we're almost looking at it as like a flip to players coming to us. It's like, well, let's go to clubs and say, this is how we can better the player experience in club and outside of club. So,
and then in terms of how you see that operating, we're not looking so much at the higher level now, but the lower level. Is that a case of having certain staff members dealing with certain clubs and again, scaling that down depending on facilities and finances and all the rest of it, and having a bit of a scaled model to say, this is what's available, this is what it's going to give you, but this is what it's going to cost as well, and then having that across the board?
Yeah, exactly. It's all again, I keep using the word because we use it a lot. It's all discovery, right? So
yeah,
as soon as those initial conversations are had, we need to understand what their requirements are from a club level, from a managerial level, from a way they want to play, that sort of thing, to then understand what we think we should provide and what we should prioritize. So to give an example, we work with Chester Football Club, and we have done for 2 seasons now, and their position is, they're in the National League North. They're quite a big club, but financially they're not necessarily got like a massive backing. They don't have a full-time or a part-time member of staff that's a strength and conditioning coach. They have a part-time physio, part-time or full-time, one or two. He's a physio that also plays for the club. Yeah, for the club.
Which is interesting in itself.
Yeah, he's a really good guy, actually. He's a really, really good guy. Good physio, but yeah, very interesting. He's I think he's a better physio than he's a footballer now. So.
Oh, really?
He'll tell me that as well. That's not true from me. But yeah, as an example for them, so it was actually the manager that approached us a couple of years ago because we were working with one of his players, and he really enjoyed what we were doing with him. So the sort of work we do for them after the sort of discovery phase is, okay, they haven't really got equipment for testing. They haven't got a member of staff for things like your programming and making sure the gym programs are right, and supporting sometimes on training sessions with, whether it's conditioning drills or whatever it might be, or GPS load monitoring, things like that. So our role for them was very, very simply and very quickly, okay, we're going to profile twice a year, pre-season, mid-season. They're going to come to us for the gym-based profiling because we've got all the equipment. We're then going to go to them for the field-based profiling. We'll then also work with our app, which is the KPI app online, like an online training system that we can build all of the programs so that they can crack on with the programs. They haven't got a gym, so it's something for them to, they've got a very small gym within the stadium. But most of them will go to their own gyms to like crack on with programs and things like that.
Yeah.
Not so much anymore for different reasons, but we'd also then help with, they wear GPS, so building things like load monitoring spreadsheets to help inform the managers and the part-time physio of sort of readiness and whether people are overreaching or anything like that. And then with them at the moment, we go down once every 2 weeks to actually assist face-to-face with some coaching, and that's where we will get involved in things like obviously your warm-ups, but we call it more like prep rather than warm-ups. It's proper prep work. We'll do like some movement skills type activities, depending on the type of day. So normally we'll go down on a Tuesday when they don't have a midweek game. So it's like a high load day. So we'll do some like speed prep stuff.
Yeah.
We'll then have like some sort of conditioning drills and stuff as well. So there'll be a lot of like face-to-face contacts once every 2 weeks. And yeah, that fits for them because that's what they currently have available. That's currently what they can afford, and that's what we prioritize and what we think is best for the club. So yeah, it's very much like a discovery. What do we think they need? What can they afford? What fits for them? And then how can we sort of display that across a season or two.
I love this. I think it's really exciting as well for clubs right across the board and practitioners as well, because this support and level of support, clubs want it, don't they? Right through the levels, they want to act and operate as professionally as possible. And you get, and I mean, in terms of players, you're getting a lot of players stepping down and playing at a low level that have been used to a higher level of support. So I think this area is really interesting to me on how you're going to go about it and how these things are going to develop over the next few years as well for in terms of the consultancy.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. We've confirmed one for pre-season next season already. We're hoping to get a couple more sort of UK based or Northwest based consultancy programs that we can or consultancy organizations that we can sort of set up for more local. But really, it's very much a scalable thing. So I don't know if we mentioned before, but we've had some conversations with other clubs overseas, different sort of sports societies over in the UAE and stuff like that. Because in the UK, it's the structure and the hierarchy is like you step 1 down to step 10 of football in football teams, and what they can provide financially and from a club perspective. But then looking abroad to other countries and things like that, with all due respect, sometimes their infrastructure and experience of building successful environments for sport isn't as advanced as it is more sort of westernized countries. So so there's the consultancy sort of umbrella is quite a broad one, but it's something that's quite scalable and interchangeable depending on who we're talking to. So it's something we are actively looking to push, but still as a bit of a small business, sometimes it's tough to spend time. There's a phrase that one of my marketing guys uses quite well. It's probably not exactly that is, but basically it's a Chinese proverb or something. It's like the eagle that hunts multiple rabbits goes hungry or something.
I mean, that's so true. But that's what I said about in terms of your individual work. We've spoke about the philosophy, where it came from, the passion and all that side of things. And that's like your bread and butter, isn't it? That's where you're focusing and making that real impact. But at the same time, and this is how I'll sort of wrap things up, because I wanted to look forward at the future of things as well. There's so many avenues and potential avenues that you could take the business, and also for you as an owner of the business, in terms of what your role is going to look like in 5-10 years time. And I know you probably, if you're anything like me, I don't spend too much time thinking about that, but because you can get sort of caught up in it, can't you, and don't know where it's going to go. But the future of it, we spoke there about the consultancy, about where the potential of that. But do you think about that? Do you think about like a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, or anything like that? Or is it more like me, 5 minute and 10 minute?
Yeah. When's my next meeting?
When are we eating?
Not massively. Sometimes back of a fag packet kind of stuff. Like I'll plan the odd thing, and sometimes if I'm going through a period of more so like mentally just struggling with everything going on, sometimes I will try and just get away and strip things back a little bit. But not loads. Our three key areas really are like coaching, consultancy, and tech. That's the 3 areas that we really want to push. But I am conscious of, like that proverb that I said, as soon as we diversify too much, then the level just drops. So as soon as that volume, like I say, low volume, high intensity, as soon as that volume gets bigger, the intensity has to come down. Unless obviously, more staff and things assist with that, and that's something we're actively looking to do. There's always then that business owner mindset of the anxieties around bringing more staff in to be able to do a job to the right level. So in answer to your question, 5 years, 10 years, I've came around to the fact that as a business owner, I will be doing less coaching, which I don't love the idea of, but I also do actually really like the business development side as well, which I didn't think I would, or I didn't really anticipate. So consultancy, love that to grow. We've got 2 clubs on board at the moment. I'd love that to be 4 in the next 6 months or so. I'd love something to be abroad as well, just because it'd be cool, wouldn't it? It'd be different. Tech side, yeah, looking to release our first product this year. A lot of headaches around that at the moment, just with IP and protection and things like that. But that's fine. That's growing. Maybe in 12 months, I've got another sort of what I hope is an innovative idea for another sort of product, which I'm hoping to develop from a tech side of things. But the tech stuff, I try not to think about it too much, because I hope I don't look back at this podcast in a couple of years and think I sound like an idiot, but without sounding too positive about it, because you never can be. Like, so to make a simple comparison, a NORBOARD from Valve is now used by thousands of organizations all over the world.
Yeah.
This I want to be a very similar sort of product in elite sport. So not just elite sport, in health, exercise and health. So that could be a really big one, which I'm hoping for it to be, and mainly for the reasons of the field is still missing a piece of kit that does what that does. So it's hopefully a really useful additional sort of data set or diagnostic tool for people to have. And then the coaching, yeah. So we want to keep the intensity really high. So the only way of doing that with more clients and reaching different areas of the country or the world or whatever is to have more coaches. So which then is another thought in my head of coach education, and can we go down that route a little bit? And there's I'm sure you've had a lot of that stuff as well through the podcast, which is doing so well. But the coach education side of upskilling people in training philosophies and providing more services to players that are south-based, north-based, different country-based and stuff is a key area as well. So
Mate, I love it.
Too much.
No, it's brilliant though. It's great to tap into your mindset, Tom, seriously, about like how things have developed, where it's all gone to now, but also where it could potentially go. And I think it's so good for coaches to hear just this level of detail and how things can progress over time. And also just in terms of planning, I know we joked about not having 5-year, 10-year plans, but I think that's when you speak to a lot of people, which I know you don't, but you do. When you speak to people, you come across that and you realize that is more the case, that you go head down, you get on with things. Yes, you can have ideas and you might end up going down certain routes at certain times. There's elements of luck, there's elements of timing involved in all that as well. But it's just fascinating to hear about the sort of process that you've gone through, and it'll be great to see where things go as well. So I really, really appreciate you going into such depth on everything. It's been great to catch up with you on it. Will you just wrap us up with, just in terms of, is it just going onto the Instagram and keeping up with everything there? Or is it websites? Where would you encourage people to go to keep up with the tech and everything that you've got going on?
Yeah, my marketing team would say website, get on that straight away.
Yeah.
They're massive on
Perfect.
website. So yeah, the website's just kingperformanceideology.com. So just our business name.com, which you can kind of see there.
There we
if
go.
Anyone doesn't, if anyone doesn't know how to spell it. Website, Instagram, Tom_KPI, or the long business name again, which is a very tedious business name to write out all the time, especially when it's your email address as well. So my email is tom@kingperformanceideology.com.
Perfect.
So more than happy to speak to anyone if they want to reach out and have a chat. And that's
brilliant.
it.
What about you said about the role? Is that currently live, or is that going to be coming live? If people are interested, is that the same place? Yeah,
it's live. It's on the website. So if you go in the about section on the website, scroll past my ugly mug and have a member of staff's ugly mug, and at the bottom it says job vacancies. So there's an internship role and assistant sports performance coach.
Amazing.
That we're looking for. So hoping to get that sorted before the off season when it gets even busier again.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
No, Tom, you're a top man. I really appreciate that. I'm glad I spent so much time hunting and getting you on, because I knew how good this would be, and I really appreciate you doing it.
No, great. Thanks. I've really enjoyed it as well, Ben. Like I said, it was the first podcast, so thanks. It was a really good one. Appreciate it.